Hello and welcome to question and answer number 11. Amazingly, we're already up to number 11. And I am your host, Pannobhasa, or my secret public name is David Reynolds. And I was going to do this yesterday because we got lots of questions, but I was like very zombified and sleep deprived yesterday because the night before, for the first time possibly in my life, first time I can remember, I shared the same bed with a dog, and the dog was not any figurative kind of dog. It was like a literal dog, like the domesticated symbiotic carnivorous mammal Canis familiaris. And this dog really likes me, and so I spent the night with this very affectionate little whippet, like pushing up against me and nuzzling me and like licking various parts of my body, including my mouth and the soles of my feet, and occasionally walking on me. And so I had to put off for today. And so without any further ado, I will tell you again that there's lots of questions, some of them very difficult and complicated ones. In fact, I kind of have a suspicion that one or two wise guys are actually trying to ask the most difficult questions they could think of. And so this could be a long one. This could be 2 hours or something. And so I advise you to go pee before we get started. And we're not going to wait for you. So you better pause this before you go pee. And maybe get yourself some popcorn or something. But of course, wash your hands after you pee before you get the food. So without any further ado, let's get started on this long list of sometimes difficult, complicated questions with regard to Buddhism and a few other things. So the first question is from Void 92. And Void 92 asks, I would really appreciate if you could make a video on how to become a Theravada Buddhist monk in South Asia, if it is still possible nowadays. As far as I know, it's still possible. It's certainly still possible in Burma and Sri Lanka. I've been told that it's more difficult to be ordained for a Westerner to be ordained in Thailand, simply because so many Westerners are like social justice activists or have been indoctrinated into social justice so that they become troublemakers among conservative traditionalists, as most Asian monks are. So, with regard to ordaining in Thailand and Sri Lanka, I really am not in a position to give advice because I've never been ordained that way. But in Burma, the way you would become ordained is you could be ordained at, like, as I was, at like an ethnic temple in America. And then after you've already been ordained and you've got, like the monks there, or at least the abbot there endorsing you or sponsoring you, then you could go to Southeast Asia, presumably within the same tradition as the place you were ordained at. Or there are some big meditation centers in places like Myanmar, Burma, and you could contact them like on the internet, via the internet, or just go there and do a meditation retreat, and then you could sort of get your foot in the door that way. Although you'd probably be obligated to remain at that meditation center. So it is possible. And if you are going to become a Theravada Buddhist monk, it is strongly advised that you take care of all of your debts and like social obligations before you are ordained. That is necessary. Not everybody does that, but yeah, you should get rid of all of your money before the day of your ordination. And I mean, you can't be like in the military reserves or anything like that, but it is possible. And yeah, the two main ways of becoming a monk in Asia is first get ordained in the West at like an Asian temple, and then use that as a stepping stone to Asia, or else just go to one of the big meditation centers in Asia that you can find links to contact them on the internet, I assume, and and then just do it that way. But those would be the two main ways I can think of. So next question, also by Void92. Will you continue making videos? I really appreciate them. And is there any way to financially support you? Well, that's a convenient excuse for me hyping myself, I suppose. But yeah, I am continuing to make videos. In fact, I'm making one at this very moment. And yeah, I'm trying to diversify, trying to do more solo videos where I'm just reading texts and giving some commentary or just giving a little discourse. I did an interview with Bhante Jivarapanya, which went really well. So we may continue with that. There's a number of other things that I'm working on. So yeah, I am going to continue making videos, and the content will be diversified from the way it was in the past few years. And with regard to financially supporting me, I appreciate the interest. And yeah, I've got a Subscribe channel where people can subscribe and sort of commit themselves to anywhere from $0 to $100 a month as a continuing thing. Or also I have a PayPal link. Both of those are or should be in the comments, or not the comments, but the info thing below the video. So you can find them there. And it is appreciated. Oh yeah, I should also mention that another way to support me and get something back is to purchase my books. And I've got 2 of them out already. Another one should be up within a week or so. The first one is this one, Essays in Theravada Buddhism, Writings of an Incendiary Buddhist Monk. And yeah, they're collections of Buddhist essays, mostly philosophical. And yeah, they've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So it's a good book. They are all 3 of them. And there's going to be a total of 5 in this series of the writings of an incendiary Buddhist monk. And then, yeah, I may start writing other things. But at present, yeah, those would be the main ways of supporting me. If you are so inclined, if you're willing to contribute to the cause, if you just want merit, you believe in the traditional Buddhist concept of merit, then just a flat out donation in accordance with, the 2 methods that should be linked below. Or you can also buy a book, and then you get something back. So the merit may not be quite as pure, but then you get more merit from reading and considering some of the philosophical concepts in the book. So anyways a winner. And so I'll just move on. Next question is from Reconciliation. Is there an equivalent to indulgences and purgatory in Eastern religions like Buddhism? For example, reading the Bible 15 minutes is worth an indulgence of 200 days in purgatory, according to Pope Leo XIII. Well, from the Buddhist point of view, really all there is purgatory. I mean, there's no permanent hell. If you've done something really bad, or you've died with like really horrible mental states, you could wind up in a kind of hell-like realm. But it doesn't last forever. Once the karma has run its course, then you pass from there and get reborn somewhere else, maybe as a human again, maybe higher, maybe lower. So yeah, with regard to the whole concept of purgatory, sometimes in the translations, the translators are reluctant to refer to the hell realms or niraya as hell, because they're not like hell in the Western monotheistic sense of some place permanent that you go to. It's just a temporary thing, like everything. In Buddhism, everything is impermanent. Every phenomenal thing is impermanent, and that includes an existence in hell, or an existence in heaven, or an existence as a human, or anywhere else. So with regard to the indulgences part, there's another question similar to this lower down, I think. But yeah, there's no way you can really erase your bad karma. That your bad karma has to run its course, or there are some cases, according to Abhidhamma, that you have some bad karma, or good karma for that matter, and just the opportunity doesn't arise. It's just the circumstances never quite are ready or ripe for this particular karma to arise. And so over several lifetimes, it can just fade out. But with regard to bad things you've done, there is a famous sutta, and I've mentioned this before, where the Buddha refers to bad karma you've done in the past as a handful of salt. And if you take that handful of salt and you mix it with a cup of water, it's so salty that you can't drink it. But you take that same handful of salt and mix it into a whole pool of water, and once it's dissolved in there, you may hardly taste the salt at all. It may be just unnoticeable. And so he refers to that as like a way of diluting down bad karma. So from the Buddhist point of view, the best thing you can do if you've got bad karma is just overwhelm it with lots of good karma. Just do lots of good things to compensate. And that will at least, what's the word? It'll make the bad karma, even if it arises, much more tolerable, or not nearly so bad. Like in my life, I've got a history of when something really bad happens, there's also usually something good that happens along with it. Like when I was in Burma, the two times I was hospitalized with malaria, two times I was so sick with malaria that I had to go to a hospital. Just through seemingly random chance, somebody showed up at this remote forest area in a Jeep and was able to just take me right back to the hospital upon arriving. And another time was I used to bite into rocks in my food when I was in Burma, just out in the forest, out in the same remote areas. And sometimes there'd be like this loud crack and it would hurt, and I'd be feeling around inside my mouth just to see if I broke a tooth. And I'd be thinking, like, if I break a tooth out here in the middle of nowhere, that's not going to be good. You know, how am I going to get to a dentist or anything? And so finally, I was staying temporarily in this rich neighborhood in Rangoon, you know, like the by far the biggest city in Burma. And some servant, I went for alms round through the neighborhood, and some servant girl offered me some bean curry that had a rock in it, and I bit into it and broke 3 teeth on this one rock. And so I had to see a dentist, but as it turned out, just through karmic coincidence, the servant girl was the servant of the dean and rector of the Rangoon Dental College. So he was just right across the street. And so I finally did break my tooth or teeth biting into a rock in my food. But, you know, it was the person who was more or less responsible for that was, you know, the number one dentist in the country. And so he fixed my teeth for free. And I had him as my free dentist for a few years after that. And so I had the same dentist as the dictator because he was the number one dentist in the country. So, yeah, getting back to the question though, it's like, yeah, I mean, you can't make your bad karma go away. I mean, there's no way of being forgiven for your sins. I mean, if you forgive yourself, I mean, that can help you from making more bad karma through the guilt and regret and remorse and all that. But it's not like in Christianity where a priest can just wave his hand over you, or like in Shinto also, where they'll just wave the wand at you and make your sins go away. It doesn't work that way. It's got to run its course. And so the best you can do is just dilute it way down with lots of good. And so the next question, by reconciliation: was there ever a time when there was nothing? If so, then how is it possible something can come from nothing? If not, then why no creator? This is getting into the whole unthinkable issue of the Buddhist middle path, where the middle path isn't just the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture. The middle path, there's lots of middle paths in Buddhism. And I mean, there's like a middle path between existence and non-existence, the middle path between one and more than one. You know, it's just a mind blower. It's not logical. I mean, it's if you're dealing with like Aristotelian laws of thought, everything has to be A or not A. You know, everything has to be logical and reasonable. You're living in an artificial mental construct. But reality is just unthinkable and doesn't work that way. Let's see, ever a time when there was nothing in existence, non-existence. From the Buddhist point of view, what causes this universe to seem to exist anyway is ignorance or delusion. And I've got my own theory. It kind of arose spontaneously when I was out in a forest one time, and I refer to it as the simile of the block of marble. I assume some of you have heard of that before, where it's like the entire universe is just this dimensionless, sizeless point. You know, you can't really say that it exists or doesn't exist, and um, I kind of relied on the one useful idea I ever got from Hegel is how he starts his logic. He starts his dialectic. You know, the first thesis is just pure being. And then the antithesis to pure being is pure non-being, because Hegel points out that pure being and pure non-being are so completely devoid of any distinct content. They don't have any boundaries, any kind of variation. You know, there's just like pure, unthinkable, just like without boundaries, just infinite, formless. And so, because pure being and pure non-being are just indistinguishable, that they just melt together into one thing. You can't tell them apart. And so the only way you can have anything that seems to exist in a perceptual sense is you have to have contrast. So your mind has to create a contrast between this and not this. You know, in order to perceive something, you have to create an outline around it, so to speak. You know, you have to focus your attention on that and differentiate it from everything around it. And so it's like to exist is like being and not being rubbing up against each other, or yes and no, or is and isn't, or even like theism and atheism, you know, God and no God. They have to like rub up against each other, but ultimately they're the same. It's just an artificial distinction. And if that doesn't make sense to you, well, congratulations, because I mean, it's so difficult for that to make sense. I mean, it's just off the scale. Reality is off the scale. Reality cannot be comprehended intellectually, not ultimate reality anyway. So, how is it possible something can come from nothing? One way of one way of thinking about it is that all the positives and all the negatives have to balance out in the long run. That in the universe, all the positives and negatives cancel each other out, so you wind up with zero. So that's one way of doing it. Let's see. Also, from the Buddhist point of view, I mean, it's not really existence. It's like a virtual or conditional existence, and it's based on this formless everything, nothing that is incomprehensible. So, in a way, there is a creator for this universe, but the creator is a deluded and unenlightened mind. And you can say, well, what created the deluded and unenlightened mind? In a way, that's like um, within, within this formless, unthinkable everything, nothing. You can say that there are every possibility is contained. It's like the block of marble. Every possible statue is contained within that block of marble. It's potentially there. It's really there. Every single molecule, every single atom is already right there in the right place. All you got to do is dismiss the rest of it. And so it's like some of these potential forms of energy, or whatever you want to call it, become self-referential. They become so complicated that they start perceiving themselves in a limited and diluted way and thinking that they are separate from everything else. And that everything else, again, you can't really say that it does or doesn't exist, because it's just completely off the scale of like artificial perceptual dualities of yes and no, is and isn't, etc. So, I mean, if this doesn't make sense to you, yeah, it's not really supposed to make sense. It's the middle path is something you have to experience directly and largely through mystical states. I mean, it's like when you stop thinking, you're wide awake and you're not thinking anything, then you can grok it. You can like intuitively, I suppose, get a feel for the idea, or the, call it a fact, that this phenomenal world we're living in is a kind of artificial construction. Um, that, I mean, everything is infinite. What's his name, William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, we would see everything as it is, infinite. But we have limitations, and we don't see that there is this. I mean, we're just seeing this tiny fraction of infinity, when really infinity's, everywhere, always there. And that infinity, again, going back to Hegel, everything and nothing really kind of merge together. So again, it's like, I'm talking about this stuff is complicated. Um, but yeah, I think I should just move on. Like I said, people are asking like the most difficult possible questions on this one. So the next question is from Vajra Wolf 77. You said that you feel that magic, and here magic is spelled Magick. So he's talking about kind of Aleister Crowley's version of magic. So I'll start again. You said you feel that magic is something not spiritually beneficial. Crowley defined magic as causing change in conformity with one's own will, whether that be change in one's own consciousness or the external world. Sometimes this was done with elaborate ritual, but it needn't be. With that being said, maybe not for a monk whose goal is a straight shot right to the absolute through complete renunciation, but for the average person still in the world who can't completely renounce, don't you think there could be some spiritual benefit to this type of practice? For example, perhaps using ritualistic techniques to cause change in one's own consciousness or physical environment that will make them more conducive to spiritual practice. Also, going along with the theme of magic, genuinely curious if you've ever looked into or studied the Western concepts of theurgy, God magic, in your spiritual journey. It is closely associated with Neoplatonic philosophy, so I could see why you would reject it, as the Neoplatonic nous is similar to Atman, but the goal of said magic, always with a K, is essentially gnosis or liberation, so I'd be curious to know if you think there is any value in that. Okay, long, complicated question. But yeah, in a previous video, I said that I really didn't think that magic with a K was really dharmic. That, like it says here, that it's causing change in conformity with one's own will. But really, if you're trying to be dharmic or truly spiritual, you're trying to transcend your own will. It's like um, causing change in conformity with your own will is essentially manipulating samsara. You're still purely samsaric at that point. And I think Crowley really was. It's like the point of what he was doing seemed to be mastery of samsara more than the transcendence of samsara to attain some ultimate reality beyond samsara. So he's still dealing with the illusion that magic, in a way, is kind of mastery over the illusion, or manipulating the illusion masterfully. But I am unsure of there being any emphasis on really transcending the illusion and not being deluded anymore. And if you want to know the wisdom of a system, I mean, it's good to see what the teachers of that system are like, especially the original teacher. And if you look at Aleister Crowley, I mean, he did not strike me as a wise person. In fact, he was kind of a bad guy, kind of a very rascally guy. And there's nothing necessarily bad with being a rascal, but I just do not consider him to be particularly wise. So, yeah, with regard to magic with a K, um, I do think that if you really want to cultivate wisdom, there are better ways of going about it than this kind of Crowley stuff. So, yeah, I think I'll just move on. There's so many questions to answer here. And some of them, as I say, and as you've already seen, are rather deep, complicated ones. So I'll just move on to Vajrawolf 77's next question. Okay, something I'd like to see you address is the meaning of the word Dhamma, as it is used in the Satipatthana Sutta, as it is hard to find a clear and concise answer out there. Yuta Dhammo Bhikkhu, in one of his videos, said a Dhamma is like a teaching. Other sources I've read said Dhammas are basic categories. Your perspective would be nice, and also perhaps a little bit about how the word evolved from its use in the Bhagavad Gita to what it denotes in the Buddhist suttas. Okay, that's a good question. Although first I'll get to this last part about how the word Dhamma evolved from its use in the Bhagavad Gita, what it denotes, to what it denotes in the Buddhist suttas. It's my understanding that the Bhagavad Gita comes after the Buddhist suttas. That it has been argued that to some degree the Bhagavad Gita is an argument against Buddhism because Buddhism was becoming like the national spiritual movement of India at that time. Um, So, yeah, I don't think that the word Dhamma evolved from its use in the Bhagavad Gita to what it denotes in the Buddhist suttas, unless you want to say that the Bhagavad Gita still used like the archaic pre-Buddhist meaning of it. And Dhamma is a very vague word in Pali. It's one of the hardest words to translate. It depends on the context because it can mean just about anything. In fact, Dhamma can just mean anything, or it can mean anything real, or it can mean a mental state, or it can mean law, or it can mean philosophy, or it can mean like the true philosophy taught by the Buddha. And yeah, it can mean other things besides. And so, what Vajrawolf here is referring to is there are the four applications of mindfulness, and one of them is Dhammanupassati, which is recollection of Dhammas or Dhamma. And yeah, I mean, it is controversial. No, people do not all agree on what it's supposed to mean. And so I think the two main interpretations are given here. One is that it's like a teaching. It's like um, um, Dhammanupassati just can just be like recollection of like the philosophical concepts of Buddha, especially like the most important ones, like the Four Noble Truths or dependent co-arising, that sort of thing. Or also um, let's see what's there, basically categories. Yeah, and I mean they kind of overlap there because usually the Buddhist teachings are divided up into categories. Four Noble Truths, you got the four categories. Dependent co-arising, according to the stock formula, got divided up into 12 categories. So yeah, I mean this one I've always been unsure myself exactly what was intended, and I'm not sure if anybody really knows unless they're just guessing correctly. Um, so yeah, just interpret it as best you can, and if you find a teacher who puts forth a really good persuasive argument, then yeah, you can go with that. I guess Ajahn Tanisro's explanation is as plausible and reasonable as any, so you might want to refer to him. But I agree, it's like I also have never been quite sure what is referred to in Dhammanupassati, like the fourth of the four Satipatthanas. And I do think it was just kind of like a catch-all, like a maybe. I mean, calling it a junk drawer would be disrespectful, perhaps, but yeah, I think it could just be like recollection of basic principles of Buddhist philosophy, something like that. That would be my best guess, but as I say, it's just a guess. I'm not 100% sure on that. So I'll move on to the next question by Nardi. How do you interpret the five aggregates? As something just empty inside and outside, or as something more? And this is another one. Man, it's just I'm getting hit with these really deep, difficult to answer questions because this one also, it's like most people, it seems like they're just locked into this dichotomy like of dualism. It's like either it exists or it doesn't exist, either it's real or it isn't real, and the middle path like of dependent core rising paticca samuppada especially just cuts right down the middle. It's just sort of real, conventionally real, real within this artificial construct that we're creating. It's real within the context of the Matrix or Plato's cave, but in reality, it's just yeah, it just doesn't work that way. So how do I interpret the five aggregates? And he's not asking for me to give a definition of the five aggregates, which is good. Um, but for those of you who are unfamiliar, the five aggregates or the five khandhas are supposedly what we are made of in our totality. So you've got Rupa Khandha, which is the body. You've got Vedana Khandha, which is feelings and sensations. You've got Sanya Khandha, which is perceptions. You've got Sankhara Khandha, which is mainly volitions. It's like your Chetana, your karma. And then finally, you've got Vijnana Khandha, which is consciousness. So that, from the Buddhist perspective, from the point of view of Buddhist philosophy, that is all we are, is these five aggregates. And again, it seems like Nardi is mainly asking here, is it really purely empty, or is it something more than empty? And again, it's like the middle path between empty and not empty, existence and non-existence. I've got my translation of the Atthakavagga here. It's not for sale at present, but there's a very old sutta, the Kalahawivada Sutta, and right here, it's verse 9 of the Kalahawivada Sutta. In stimulation are founded pleasant and unpleasant. In stimulation not being, they do not exist. Non-existence and existence too, whatever that means, I tell you that they are founded in this. So in this really ancient sutta, it's a very old one, the Buddha himself is apparently saying that non-existence and existence themselves depend upon phassa in Pali, which usually is translated as contact, but here I translated as stimulation. So it's like existence and non-existence are essentially mental perceptions or mental states. And like ultimate reality just transcends that dichotomy, the dichotomy between is and isn't. And it's a mind blower, and it may not be able to be comprehended intellectually. You just have to grok it. You have to just get to this mystical state where you just experience the truth of that. So, let's see, getting back to Nardi's question, are the five aggregates something just empty inside and outside, or are they more than that? It all depends on how you look at it, man. You know, it's like what is empty? Like some people would say empty is just zero, which then that wouldn't be correct, because zero is just one of the extremes. You know, zero and not zero are the two extremes, and the little path cuts between that. In Mahayana Buddhism, which has a bit more sophistication in its metaphysics and its philosophy in general, then dependent core rising itself is the definition of emptiness. Like Nagarjuna says, dependent core rising is emptiness. So it's like this conditional virtual existence that isn't really totally real and isn't really totally not real. And like you can say that a mirage isn't totally unreal, because I mean there's something causing that mirage, and in this case it's just virtual um, mental. It's like a kind of mentality that has become so complicated that it looks inwards at itself and forgets that it's really attached to just this formless consciousness all around it. And because the consciousness in that sense, you know, like Brahman or like the noise of Plotinus, um, because it's just infinite and formless, then it really doesn't have any way of like pointing to anything and saying that. And so it just kind of transcends existence. And like Hegel says, it just kind of merges into the same thing as non-existence. So again, we're just wallowing in just the mind-bending implications of dependent co-arising. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. And the next question is from Otomo. How do you deal with an ordained monk or nun who is clearly showing signs of mental illness, delusions, paranoia, lack of emotional control, manic states, extreme phobias? The flip side is, how do you deal with a layperson also exhibiting signs of mental illness who insists that the monks or the facilities of the temple must help them? Okay, so that's at least two questions really. In Vinaya, in the monastic code, the rules of monastic discipline for Theravada Buddhist monks and nuns, there is a kind of exemption from having to follow the rules in a monk or a nun that has gone so insane that they're no longer fully aware of their behavior. You know, they're going into like a fugue state or something. They're no longer fully responsible for their actions. Then they can do all sorts of things, and if they have no recollection of it afterwards, then they really are not held to account. They're not considered to be guilty of breaking those rules. If they're just crazy in the usual sense of neurotic or whatever, then yeah, welcome to the club. That's the human condition. That from the Buddhist point of view, anybody who is not fully enlightened is to that extent insane. Like there's the old saying in Pali, putujino omarako, which is the common person is out of his mind. So that kind of insanity, yeah, so long as you're still aware of what you're doing, more or less, then yeah, you're still responsible. Because, I mean, the state you're in is your own doing ultimately. It's all because of your own karma, your own actions, especially your own mental actions. So, yeah, with regard to monks or nuns, clearly showing mental signs of mental illness, if they're so completely out of it, you know, they're having a psychotic episode or something, then they may not be responsible for their actions. But if they at least are aware of what they're doing, you know, it's just a standard case of neurosis or something like that, or like schizophrenia maybe, if it's not like really extreme, then still they are responsible for their actions. And um, I'm not exactly. It would depend on the case as to what actually to do with them. I mean, there's if they've got a wise teacher, he could assign them some practice that could help ground them. And there are various ways of doing that, and I won't really get into that. But with regard to lay people who are exhibiting signs of mental illness and who insist that the monks or facilities of the temple must help them, well, I mean, really, the monks at the temple, at the monastery, um, they can send metta. I mean, they can just beam love at the person, which may help straighten them out. If they're like possessed by a demon or something, the monks may chant parita over them and try to like exorcise any kind of malevolent forces. They're not absolutely required to do that, but they might as well. It's if they're able to. I mean, if they're just completely, you know, not qualified to do it and realize that, then maybe they should advise the person to try somewhere else, or try a psychologist or psychiatrist or something. But yeah, I mean, if the monks know what to do and are able to help, then certainly that would be a good thing to do. But I mean, if they just don't know how to deal with the situation, they shouldn't just blunder in and try to do something that might cause more harm than good. So yeah, it's monks are not required by the ancient rules to um, act as therapists for lay people. But I mean, if they are qualified, if it's something relatively straightforward, you know, just you know, giving them some advice to help ground them, that kind of thing, then yeah, that would be fine. Next question from Otomo: what qualifies a person to give a Dhamma talk? Well, I mean, if they know what they're talking about, I mean, that's basically it. From the point of view of monasticism, Buddhist monasticism, um, a monk probably, I mean, even beginners give talks. In the suttas, there are some beginning monks who are already giving talks. So, I mean, you can't really become a teacher of disciples until you've been a monk for at least 10 years. But what qualifies a person to give a Dharma talk is if they just know what they're talking about. I mean, that's the bottom line right there. I mean, if you understand what you're talking about, then that's it. So next question is from Stephen, and this is a long one. We know superstition exists, for example, the stories in ancient Buddhist and other religious texts, and we also know how those with strong faith accept these stories as fact. People with less faith reject these stories as myth. In light of the above, I suggest it is possible that the stories about Buddha and his spiritual attainments could also be superstition, possibly, maybe. I think it's a possibility that just as stories of religious leaders were created to attain specific goals, for example, the arising or creation of the philosophy that Jesus Christ was actually God, and how that was new philosophy was perhaps used to strengthen and unify the Roman Empire, which adopted it as it was under attack from barbarians, or the creation of the stories of Muhammad, which did not begin to arise until at least 100 years after the alleged birth of Muhammad ibn Ishaq, etc., whatever that means. I continue, or the creation of the myth of ancient Jewish leaders, for example, Abraham, Moses, etc., which were written about while the Jews were taken captive into ancient Babylon, and how these ancient stories served a purpose to help the Jews in Babylon survive their exile from Judea. Israel is the same. In the same way, can you see the possibility that perhaps the stories about Buddha were created or exaggerated? Okay, the whole question just essentially boils down to the last sentence. Can you see the possibility that perhaps the stories about Buddha were created or exaggerated? And obviously, from a Western point of view, some of the stories about Buddha were exaggerated or created. Yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone who is familiar with the Pali texts and the commentarial tradition knows that, for example, the tradition says that the Buddha was about 27 or like 5 meters tall, which is just, yeah, I mean, that's just, yeah, I do not consider that to be plausible. Or like the 32 marks of a great being. Um, I mean, it's just impossible that any one person could have all 32 marks. So that's impossible right there. I mean, that's just a logical impossibility. Or some of the miracles that the Buddha supposedly performed in the text, he's warning monks repeatedly, don't be just showing off miracles or psychic powers. Um, you should hide that kind of stuff. You shouldn't be showing it off to people. But then sometimes he'll just ignore his own advice, and like the classic example of that is the twin miracle, where the Buddha supposedly levitated up into the air and sprayed water out of one side of his body and fire out of the other side simultaneously. And that's supposedly such a huge miracle that only a Buddha could do that. But yeah, as a Westerner with a capacity for skeptical thought, yeah, I've got some skeptical thought with regard to that kind of stuff. And it's mainly just a matter of glorifying the founder of the tradition, making him seem even better than he already was. And the way he already was is good enough, an enlightened being. In fact, it's kind of counterproductive, like the same way with Jesus, where probably Jesus and the Buddha were human beings that attained this relatively or even absolutely exalted state. And they're saying, look, I'm a human being, same as you. I can do it, so you can do it too. And then people come after that, they're not in a position to try that hard, or they're just not ripe for it. And so they just deify the founder or glorify the founder beyond the human level and just start worshiping. So yeah, it's just human nature, I think. But I am inclined to agree, and it is logically pretty obvious that not everything that is said about the Buddha, even in the oldest texts, is entirely true. So I'll move on to the next question from Hey It's Tig. Pannobhasa, do you have any insight on aditana? I've heard it referred in the context of strong determination in meditation sitting, but was wondering if it had a broader or different meaning. Thanks. You're welcome. And yeah, aditana literally means determination, and it's one of the 10 paramis. Let's see. 7, 8. Menu. Yeah, it's the 8th of the 10 paramis, and it just means determination. It's not necessarily restricted to meditation. It's like anything, just if you really just you're just unflinchingly determined to accomplish something, then that would be aditana. So it's not just with regard to meditation. I mean, it would require a kind of aditana perhaps to get ready to renounce the world, or maybe it would take aditana to, just face something that you don't want to face, like living in a cave or living alone or living in a cemetery. If it's just this determination, you just make this resolution, this resolve, I'm going to do this, and you just stick to it no matter what, then that would be the parami or perfection of aditana. It's a kind of spiritual quality that, if you want to become fully enlightened, then yeah, you need to have sufficient determination. So yeah, it is built into Buddhist philosophy, and it is kind of a requisite for enlightenment. Certainly a requisite for like full blown Buddhahood. And essentially it means just determination, where you just stick with something until you've accomplished it. Okay, next question from Hey It's Tig. Pannobhasa, when it comes to sex, do you think Buddhist ethics would be better for our Western society than Christian ethics? From what I understand, although both religions promote sexual restraint, Buddhism does not seem to push guilt and remorse on sinners, quote unquote. Rather, it would have people be mindful of their misdeeds and resolve not to repeat them. Do you think this approach would help alleviate the neuroses our society has when it comes to sex and sexual expression? Well, that's kind of an interesting question. And in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. In some ways, Buddhism is more easygoing with regard to sex, and in some ways, it's even stricter than Christianity. For example, with regard to the five precepts, you don't literally have to be married to somebody in order to avoid sexual misconduct. That if two people are, um, they genuinely love each other, they're not being promiscuous, they're not messing around with other people, it's like they're not already obligated to somebody else, then that would be okay. You wouldn't be breaking the five precepts with regard to that. But on the other hand, um, in Buddhism, the ethics are so finely tuned that almost anything you do is going to have some immorality mixed in. So even a man and a woman who are married, it may be that they were virgins on their wedding night. They've been faithful to each other for the past 30 years, and they just love each other dearly. But even so, if there's any kind of lust or attachment involved, then from this deep Buddhist ethics, there's going to be at least a little bit of unskillful karma, bad karma. And so in Buddhism, it's not all black and white. In Christianity, it's either it's sin or it's a virtue, and you're going to go to hell forever or go to heaven forever. And in Buddhism, it's almost everything is a shade of gray. So the layperson can't go for pure white, but they can at least go for as pale of gray as they can manage. And that could be good enough, because you don't become enlightened through reaching pure whiteness of like purity of virtue. Um, I think I may have just blasphemed or like indulged in some heresy, because like in the Visuddhimagga, it says you have to have purity of virtue before you can have purity of concentration. But still, um, yeah, nobody completely eradicates all their bad karma. And presumably only an arahant is able to proceed through life without making any bad karma at all. And so you can use a shade of gray as a jumping off point to enlightenment. I mean, that seems fairly straightforward to me. So I think it might depend on the person. I mean, um, Christianity has more of a sense of like what is it, repentance and shame and this kind of stuff that really is not healthy in my opinion. From a Buddhist point of view, it's I mean, if you're going to have moral scruples, you should have it before you do the act and not afterwards. Repentance, just from a Buddhist point of view, if it's going to be skillful, is you just acknowledge you did something wrong and just determine to do better in future. But like the whole remorse thing is, the beating your breast and crying and stuff is that just makes more bad karma. So Yeah, it's kind of a tough question. I don't think anything is going to alleviate the neuroses of our society with regard to sex and sexual expression because we're already very neurotic. And I think human beings in general are just neurotic about sex. Um, Part of that, I think I read about it in Desmond Morris's The Naked Ape, which I think was the first really important book I ever read, where he's saying that evolutionarily the human being is in a transitional state between just sort of the orgiastic sexual behavior of our tree dwelling ape ancestors. Like a chimpanzee has sex on average like 20 times a day, even if the females are not in heat, even if they're not in season. And but then when our ancestors came down out of the trees and started walking upright, then the females could have many more babies, but only if they had a male protector. Like a female chimpanzee, she can only have one baby every 6 years because she has to carry the baby through the trees with her. So the baby has to be able to make its own way through the trees before she can have another one. So when our ancestors climbed out of the trees, going with biology, of course, um, human females can have lots more kids. They can be, have a toddler and be pregnant with another one, and but it requires monogamy, or at least evolutionarily we started moving towards monogamy, but we haven't fully made the transition, and so there's all this neurotic stuff going on in our minds, and even like women, they put clothes on to kind of cover their nudity to keep the guys from going crazy, but then they're like wearing like revealing clothing, and like using like lipstick to make their lips look more like, like they're sexually aroused in this kind of a thing. So I think we're just stuck with being neurotic about sex because it is such a powerful thing that it's easy to be um, easy to have hangups and that sort of thing about it. But yeah, I think if people can overcome the Christian idea that everything is either good or bad, that there's always going to be like shades of gray, and that the average person does well just to go for light gray. If they can't manage white, then light gray is still doing pretty good. Then yeah, I think a Buddhist ethic with regard to sex could be an improvement. Although, yeah, I mean, Christian ethics have been largely abandoned in the modern West or postmodern West now, anyway. And now we're just going into like full depravity, just total degeneracy. It seems like it's like the celebration of degeneracy. So yeah, I think Buddhist ethics would definitely be preferable to like the what do you call it, postmodernist moral relativism that we seem to be seems to be gaining traction now. Next question from Andre. I think you hinted at being on the autistic spectrum. Could you talk more about that if that's not too personal, and what challenges but also rewards that brings in the practice? Or maybe you could talk about mental health in general in the practice, but really any story or anecdote you have is interesting to hear. Um, I've never really been tested for this, and so I can't really say for sure that I'm on the autistic spectrum, although I will confess that just 2 days ago, maybe even early yesterday, my girlfriend was smiling at me and kind of laughing at me for being autistic. Yeah, she says for sure I'm autistic because I mean it's like we were watching some cooking show. I'm turning into a foodie since I stopped being a monk. We were watching this cooking show, and one of the things that they were using was tempeh. And so she didn't know what a tempeh was, and so I just remarked, well, tempeh is soybeans that are cultured with a fungus called Rhizoclonium oligosporum. And she just flat out accused me of being autistic for even knowing that kind of stuff. It just registers in my mind and stays there. So yeah, I know all these scientific names from school. Pycnopodia helianthoides is the sunflower star. Strongylocentrotus drobachiensis is the green sea urchin, et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, maybe that means I'm like some kind of borderline autistic or something. And I mean, anybody who's going to be living alone in caves for 13 years anyone who's going to become even a monk, like a Western person who just bucks his own cultural traditions and just becomes a Buddhist monk and tries to live like some ancient Indian ascetic for many years. Yeah, I'm not a normie. I'm not totally normal, although you're probably better off not being totally normal. And yeah, just being abnormal. I mean, that can be definitely an asset because if you're totally normal, then you're just going to be drinking the Kool-Aid. You're going to be in the mainstream. You're going to be believing what CNN tells you, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, you're better off being kind of on the outskirts or the fringe just because it helps you to detach and not take the mainstream so seriously. It gives you a little more freedom, a little more mental freedom. But again, I can't really say if I really am on the autistic spectrum. Let's see. Make sure I get this question down before I move on to the next one. Talk about mental health in general in the practice. Well, I mean, to have a strong, healthy mind is one thing. I mean, not to fit into society is something else. It could be that your own sanity causes you not to fit in. And I think Eric Fromm, who was a member of the Frankfurt School for a while, but still, it does kind of make sense that um, not fitting into an insane society can be considered a symptom of sanity. He wrote an entire book about that, although he was pushing some kind of socialism in the process. But yeah, I mean, you have to be mentally healthy to practice correctly. I think it is a mistake that you've got like Dharma centers having like healing retreats and that kind of thing. It is kind of morbid to me that I mean, just to emphasize healing emphasizes something that you have to heal from. So it's like it's to some degree it's reinforcing the problem. I've got nothing against people using um, Buddhist techniques to cure themselves of mental dysfunctions. Like I used to know a psychiatrist who's one of the world's leading authorities on obsessive compulsive disorder. Like people who have this irresistible urge to wash their hands 50 or 100 times a day, or they're afraid to touch anything because of the germs, or they have to check their front door to make sure it's locked again and again and again, or they have to check the coffee maker again and again and again, make sure it's turned off, that kind of a thing. And you can use like mindfulness techniques to cure yourself of that. But um, really, Buddhism was originally intended for people who were mentally healthy, and really, the only pure mental health would be enlightenment. So you're moving towards greater mental health. Like I said earlier, the average person is insane going from Buddhist philosophy, and so yeah, you start where you're at and you do the best you can, and the higher you get in your practice, the more sane you are going to be. So again, there's lots of questions here, and so I'm just gonna. I hope I answered that well enough. Um, I'm not sure that I'm autistic, regardless of my girlfriend's teasing me. But and with regard to mental health, yeah, I mean we're all insane up until we're fully enlightened. And the more you practice Dhamma and the better you are at practicing Dhamma, the more completely you can practice Dhamma, the more sane you are going to be. Although being sane from a Buddhist perspective might seem pretty weird from like the mainstream perspective. I mean, saints and sages may seem pretty weird and eccentric and maybe even nutty from the mainstream Western perspective, especially. So yeah, crazy is largely um, it's a debatable state. Okay, next question from Andre. I've heard a monk say once that you can correct your bad karma by donating money or time to a cause in relation to that bad karma. What do you think? Or is being generous in general, keeping the precepts and meditating enough? Yeah, I've already kind of dealt with the whole indulgences thing up above. Um, you can't really correct your bad karma, but you can alleviate it. You can dilute it down by doing benevolent acts, making good karma to kind of drown out or dilute the bad karma. Um, yeah, so there's no way you can like erase bad karma other than possibly just avoiding the circumstances that would allow it to reach fruition long enough that it fades out over the course of several lifetimes. But yeah, your best bet is just do as much good as possible. Do more good than bad, and you're going to be moving upwards. You do more bad than good, you're going to be moving downwards. Again, it's not like in Christianity where it's all good or all bad. You know, it's all black and white, where you're either going to go to heaven forever or go to hell forever after you die. Um, it's just all shades of gray. And so the more good you add, the lighter the gray of your overall mind is going to be. So that's the best advice I can give on that. And so I'll move on to the next question from Bodhisattva 969. From a Buddhist point of view, how should one view this clown world in which we live? Mass migration of so-called refugees, Islamization, rainbow, gay parades, guilt cult, etc. As a Buddhist, as a real liberal or right-wing man. I think by real liberal he means like a classical liberal from the American interpretation. Okay, see, I'll just back up here. As a real liberal or right-wing man, you have the feeling that nothing will change. There have been countless murders and attacks by Muslims who came into the country through Merkel's opening of the border in 2015, in addition to those Muslim foreigners who were here before. Even so, most people still vote for the same parties or even more left-wing parties. How should we as Buddhists look at this in order not to get mad or bitter? And maybe I should specify that Bodhisattva 969 is living in Germany right now. Well, I mean, for starters, we are in samsara. You can say that everything you experience is the fruition of your own karma, so you put yourself in that position even though you might not be fully aware of that. So there's that too. The world is always going to be insane. There's that too. The normie human is out of his mind. So with regard to all that, I mean, you should maintain a sense of equanimity. Just realize that, I mean, you are there because that is exactly where your karma has put you. That's exactly where you need to be in order to learn to deal with this situation, so you don't keep making the same karma that keeps you facing this stuff again and again. So that would be the best way of looking at it in order not to get mad or bitter, unless you're going to get mad and bitter at yourself, because from the Buddhist point of view, you put yourself in that position and you need to learn how to cope with it with equanimity, or maybe even some metta or like love or friendliness. Yeah, because if you react negatively, if you react with anger or bitterness or that sort of thing, then you're reinforcing the karma and causing it to keep coming up. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to fix the situation. You shouldn't do what is within your means to improve the situation. You know, you can vote against open borders, for example. You know, you can even indulge in some activism, so long as it's enlightened activism and it's motivated by positive mental states instead of negative mental states. So whatever you do, I mean, you should do it with equanimity or positive mental states as much as possible. And that would include dealing with the insanity of politics, because politics has always been insane. It seems to me that the relative calm that we experienced like in the 80s and 90s and maybe the aughts, you know, the first decade of the 21st century, that was more the exception to the rule. That was just the kind of prosperity and peace that really is an anomaly. And now we're getting back towards the kind of usual mayhem and insanity and hysteria that usually accompanies civilized society or any kind of human society. I mean, anyone who's read a lot of history knows that there's just been shit hitting the fan just over and over and over and over. You know, it's like the Roman Empire. It's like Tiberius was the second emperor, and Caligula was the third emperor. So like just within a few decades of the Roman Empire beginning, you've already got this lunatic who's like totalitarian dictator. So, yeah, I mean, this kind of stuff is just always going to be going on, and it's ultimately our own doing because our own karma has put us here. So we just have to learn to deal with it with some equanimity. And if you take decisive action, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that your motives are more good than bad, as good as possible, as positive as possible, that you're actually trying to help, help your brothers and sisters, just try to help the situation and not just try to get revenge on somebody that you don't like or lash out at your enemies, that kind of a thing. And I've given the same kind of advice to like feminists. I mean, if someone's going to be a feminist, they should do it out of love for women rather than hatred or resentment against men. Or if someone is like you've got like a black activist trying to improve the situation of black people in the West, they should do it out of love for black people and not resentment or anger or hatred against white people. Because if you do anything motivated by positive states, you're making good karma and you're likely to actually improve the situation, even though it may not be really obvious that you improved it. Whereas even if you're motivated by hatred or anger or resentment, even if you get what you're trying for, still it's going to result in more bad than good. It's going to just breed more resentment and anger. Anger breeds more anger, resentment breeds more resentment. And so having some peace in your heart when you're doing what needs to be done is really the best way to go about it. So next question is from BPAT427. Regarding right livelihood, to what degree would you say that extends? For example, if someone works at a restaurant that cooks with hydrogenated vegetable oils and serves soda, would that be viewed as dealing poison? If somebody manufactures scopes, slings, or accessories for firearms, could one still be said to deal in weapons? Would making weapons designed for target practice as opposed to war or hunting net you less bad karma, or would it all be volitional and depend on how you feel regarding your profession? Well, BPAT427 is obviously a Westerner because Asians just don't think this way. Yeah, like if you work at a restaurant and cook with hydrogenated vegetable oils and serve like Coca-Cola, would that be viewed as dealing in poison? Yeah, well, dealing in poison is wrong livelihood. Like if you're at a grocery store and you're selling like insecticide or rat poison, something like that, then that would be wrong livelihood. But with regard to the hydrogenated vegetable oils and the soda pop, that would depend on your own volition. It's like if you consider hydrogenated vegetable oils to be toxic and you are serving them to people, then yeah, in your own mind, which is really all what matters most, then yeah, I mean, in your own mind, you're poisoning people, and so yeah, that would be wrong livelihood, especially if you're taking their money. You know, you're having them pay you to poison them. So, yeah, with regard to that one, it depends on your own perspective. I personally do not consider hydrogenated vegetable oils to be poison. It might not be the most healthy food. Obviously, sugar and high fructose corn syrup are not the most nutritious foods you could eat. But it depends on that one depends on your own perception. Okay, let's see. If someone manufactures scope slings and accessories for firearms, one would still be said to deal in weapons. Again, that is the. I mean, Buddhist ethics depends on volition. It depends on, and your volition is like completely linked with your perceptions. So yeah, if you sincerely believe that scopes, slings, and other accessories for firearms um, are not like dealing with lethal weapons, then yeah, I mean um, you're still not doing wrong livelihood. But you got to be honest with yourself. I mean, just indulging in sophistry, just trying to twist things so that you come out okay. I mean, that's not good either. You got to be honest with yourself. Um, so that one, yeah, that's like a gray borderline case, and it would depend more on your own attitude. If you really feel that you are selling lethal weapons by making slings for an M16 or something, then yeah, that would be technically wrong livelihood. Although, as I've said in an earlier video, wrong livelihood is really a tricky one. Like even if you're just working at a grocery store and you're selling wine to somebody, then you've just sold intoxicants. You're a drug dealer. Or you're at a restaurant and you're serving wine to somebody. Again, you're technically, from a Buddhist perspective, a drug dealer. You are providing people with intoxicants. But again, it's like um, in the West, especially, going for pure white may not be realistic. I mean, just going for as light of gray as you feel comfortable with, it may be your best bet. Um, but let's continue here. Would making weapons designed for target practice net you less bad karma? Yeah, I mean, if it's just for target practice, then it's not really a lethal weapon, is it? It's like I mean, just making a knife, like kitchen knives. I mean, it's true that more people are stabbed to death with kitchen knives than shot with guns in this world. But still, I mean, if you're just making kitchen knives and you consider that to be kitchen knives, then you're not hoping that somebody will use that knife to stab somebody, or then yeah, I mean, you're doing okay. I mean, somebody who makes bricks, I mean, a lot of people get killed by being bashed in the head with bricks, but that doesn't mean that you're like selling lethal weapons by selling bricks. It would depend on your own perception. I mean, if you really want somebody to use your bricks to bash other people in the head, then yeah, you're making bad karma, and that could be wrong livelihood too. But just following precepts, I mean, you got to be careful not just to get lost in the idea of just the words of the rules. I mean, really, what it all boils down to is your own mental states, and yeah, try to keep them as neutral or as positive as you can manage. Ultimately, neutrality is better than positivity because, like, positive karma is still karma. It's keeping you in samsara. Like Mara, the Buddhist devil, if he can't get you to be bad, he'll get you to be good because either way, you're still creating karma that's keeping you bound up in the system. So yeah, at the end here, so, or would it all be volitional and depend on how you feel regarding your profession? Yeah, that's exactly it. So I'll just move on to BPAT 427's next question. Is it considered sexual misconduct for a monk to occasionally masturbate if he's abstaining from all sexual activity but his mind is fixated on sex and he happens to have a wet dream? Would that be breaking any Winia rules? Okay, that's two questions. And let's see. Yeah, a monk is not allowed. It's Sangha di Sesa number 1. It's like one of them. It's like the 5th rule of all the monk rules. It's a relatively serious one that a monk is not allowed to have an orgasm deliberately unless it's in a dream. So technically, spanking the puppy is against the rules, but if you just pet it a little bit, you're still making, sensual karma. You're still indulging in lust and attachment and everything, but you're not technically breaking the rule so long as you're not intending to have an orgasm. So long as you're not trying to have an orgasm consciously and deliberately, then it's not exactly against the rules. Although, as I was saying earlier, Buddhist ethics are so finely tuned that any kind of lust or attachment is going to create at least a light and gray ethical situation. So, yeah, if he's abstaining from all sexual activity but his mind is fixated on sex, yeah, well, I mean, to the extent your mind is fixated on it, if thoughts arise, like the first motion, like in Roman Catholicism, they'll say the first motion. It's like when the thought first arises, that's just the result of karma, and that's like a passive thing. You didn't cause the first thought to arise, but if you like dwell on it and start and you just take the ball and run with it, then yeah, you started creating akusala karma or bad karma, even if you're just sitting there fantasizing and you're not moving at all. But a wet dream is not against the rules. And when I was celibate and young, I was having a wet dream on average about once every 3 weeks or so. When I was in my 40s, they stopped happening and I missed them. The only way that would be against the rules would be if you go to sleep with the deliberate intention of having a wet dream. Like you're trying to do lucid dreaming or something. You're deliberately trying to come in your sleep then yeah, that could be breaking the rules. But if you just go to sleep, you're just a horny person, and you go to sleep and you have a erotic pornographic dream, and you have an orgasm in your sleep, then that is not against the rules. So I'll move on to the next question by BPAT427. Is there anything in the Vinaya prohibiting monks from operating vehicles or riding horses? Yeah, actually there is. There's it is against the rules for a monk to ride a horse. Um, there is a rule against a monk traveling in a vehicle, although the implication is that the vehicle is being pulled by living beings, because it's not against the rule for a monk to travel in a boat, like in a sailboat. And so I think the commentarial tradition has decided that it means like bullock carts or horse-drawn carriages or that kind of a thing. And so there is an exemption. If a monk is sick, like he's too sick to walk, he is allowed to travel in a rickshaw pulled by a man, I think, if I remember correctly. But then the commentarial tradition has that interpreted to mean a bull. So, um, yeah, I think the easy way of explaining this is that a monk is not allowed to travel in a vehicle or um, be a burden on a living being unless he is too sick to walk, and then he can avail himself of that. And I availed myself of that once in my 30 years as a monk. Um, I hurt my foot and I had to walk. I had to travel 32 miles through a forest to get to the nearest car road. And yeah, I had torn this hunk of skin off the bottom of my foot. My feet were wet and I stepped on a sharp rock and messed up the bottom of my foot. So the villagers in that area chipped in and rented me an elephant from a lumber camp. And the elephant was named Chit San Win, which means special bright love. And so I rode this elephant like halfway, 16 miles through the forest until we got to a kind of dirt road. The bridge was washed out, so cars couldn't get there yet, but we could follow this dirt road on a bullock cart. So I got off the elephant and onto this bullock cart. And it was while riding the bullock cart that I realized why it's against the rules for monks to ride in bullock carts unless they're sick, because unlike horses, as soon as you stop beating on a bullock, it starts slowing down. And so to go 16 miles in a bullock cart, two bullocks are receiving a 7 hour long beating. And so, yeah, it makes sense. Although with regard to cars, um, they, I mean, obviously they didn't exist in ancient India when the rules were made. So the experts in modern times have compared cars with like boats, where um, it's like there's no animal getting a beating from you being in a boat, so that was considered to be okay, and it might be the only way of crossing the river anyway if there's no bridge. So people kind of um, considered cars and trains and that sort of thing to be sort of like boats. And but there were, like, I have been told that when cars and trains first reached Burma, there were some strict monks that just refused, and just everywhere they went was on foot. Although that could be definitely a handicap nowadays when monks are traveling all over the world. Let's see, where am I here? Yeah, so okay, I think I answered that question. Now the next question from BPAT427, as an extension of my previous question, would one accrue more bad karma for enabling people in unwholesome professions? For example, would a heroin addict develop more bad karma for enabling a heroin dealer to sell him poison on top of the bad karma they're already creating? Um, yeah, I think yeah, I think that's pretty likely. I mean, it would depend on the case, but obviously, like taking an extreme example, if you're hiring a hitman to kill somebody that you don't like, then yeah, you're facilitating somebody else committing murder, which isn't going to improve your karma at all. But again, it's like it depends on your own volitions. So, um, yeah, I like the lady at the grocery store. If she's selling you a 6 pack of beer, um, I doubt that she's going to be um, punished in the hereafter very much, if at all, for selling you that 6 pack of beer, especially if she doesn't see anything wrong with it. She's just a westernized normie who doesn't consider it to be immoral at all. Um, she's not a Buddhist keeping 5 precepts, so she's not breaking that precept really. She hasn't taken it upon herself to begin with. So yeah, it would depend on the individual case. But yeah, I mean, if you're doing business with here we go, the heroin dealer, um, yeah, I mean, you're facilitating um, their own unwholesome behavior and possibly their own greed and so forth. Besides, I mean, you could be buying something completely normal from somebody and still you're facilitating their greed. You know, you buy a car from the notoriously stereotypical used car salesman, and he's like trying to get as much money out of you as he can. Then he's going to be chuckling at how he ripped you off because he didn't include the spare tire or something, and yeah, he's going to get bad karma for that. But you can't really be responsible for other people's mental states entirely. But yeah, obvious cases. I mean, if you're hiring Orkin to exterminate your insects in your house rather than exterminating them yourself, I mean, you're essentially doing the same thing. And a lot of the Vinaya rules are the same. It's like monk is not allowed to commit murder, but he's not allowed to help anybody else commit murder either. He's not allowed to kill animals, but he's not allowed to like have somebody else do it for him either, because essentially you're just using the other person as an instrument. So I hope I answered that one, and so I'll move on to the next one. Oh, this one's a Lulu too. When a fully enlightened being dies, does their specific strain of consciousness cease to exist, quote, 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 or could it then be projected anywhere due to its infinite nature? And this is one of the questions that the Buddha himself refused to answer. If the Tathagata, after the Tathagata dies, does he cease to exist, or does he continue to exist? I mean, you just do not answer that question. That's another one of those middle path questions between yes and no. Yes is one extreme, no is the other extreme, and the middle path just cuts right through the middle. And it makes no sense from a logical point of view, but then again, reality makes no sense from a logical point of view. Like nirvana really makes no sense from a logical point of view. So you've got rationalists trying to interpret nirvana as just pure cessation or something, and they just miss the boat. But I mean, obviously, if the Buddha refuses to answer, I mean, why should I? You know, there is one interesting sutta though, where somebody asks the Buddha if a fully enlightened being continues to exist after death, and he remarks that you can't even say for sure if the enlightened being exists even before death. So you can chew on that one too. And so, yeah, I'll just move on to the next question, also from BPAT427. Could people carrying out an involuntary sterilization eugenics program avoid negative karma if their intention is purely to benefit the society they live in? I think BPAT427 wants to sterilize people. Actually, from the Buddhist point of view, yeah, so long as you know that you're sterilizing people against their will, or helping others to sterilize people against their will, then yeah, I think you'd be making some negative karma. Because from the Buddhist point of view, even like neutering an animal, like fixing an animal, you are messing with another being's sexuality, which can come back on you. Like, I think there's some story of like Venerable Sariputta, who was the Buddha's right hand man. In a past life, he was a farmer or something who was like castrating animals. And then as a result of that, in a subsequent life, he was born as a eunuch or got turned into a eunuch. With regard to eugenics, that's a different question. Sterilization is one thing, eugenics is another. I mean, if eugenics is just, encouraging people who are like genetically compatible, they're more likely to create strong, healthy children. Um, in a way, you're still encouraging them to get naughty with each other, which I mean, that's an entirely different issue. And again, it just goes back to the whole idea that absolute pure whiteness, purity of virtue is a virtual impossibility, especially if you're living in the world. So, yeah, eugenics would be more light gray mandatory sterilization. Um, but I mean, if you've got a lot of good volitions, you've got a lot of good reasons, then the good reasons might outweigh the bad ones. It could be that I don't know, maybe somebody, they're just so genetically messed up that really they would be creating genetically messed up children who would be suffering a lot. Then it's possible. I mean, you'd have to weigh all the pluses and the minuses and see which is heavier before you make your decision to the best of your capacity. But messing with the sexuality of other beings, I have read in Buddhist texts that yeah, that's going to come back on you, and your own sexuality is going to get messed up if the karma is allowed to reach fruition. So the next question is from Chaplin. What is your view on collective karma, quote unquote? Can karma start with the individual, then trickle upwards in many individuals into a broader karmic effect that changes an entire community, country, society, or race? This is like a contentious issue. It's a good question too. It is a contentious issue, sort of like in evolutionary biology, where there's the argument or the controversy as to whether there's like group evolution. And I think that the mainstream, like the consensus of the mainstream is that no, it's always an individual thing. And that is also the answer in mainstream or orthodox Buddhism, that there really is no collective karma, that it's all individual, that your own individual karma will cause you to be reborn in this or that society. But you could say that there's like a virtual collective karma, that there's something kind of like collective karma, in that people who have similar karma and similar mental states, similar attitudes, are more likely to be born together in the same kind of society. So, if you've got warlike karma and a warlike attitude, you're more likely to be born into a warlike society, and other people will also. So it's sort of like you've got collective karma. And with regard to the trickle upwards of like people, um, see, how would I describe this? Like one person makes a major change in the society, which then spreads. Yeah, you'd have to say that everybody that is affected by that would already have to have the receptivity, like the karmic receptivity for that to happen to them. Um, but yeah, I mean, Orthodox Buddhism, you would say no, there is no collective karma. Although um, Orthodox Buddhism does kind of ignore the possibility that there is like a deep connections between people, and that you're just in the presence of another person, their own mental states will have an effect on you, because deep down there's like an I mean, the barrier doesn't go all the way down to the bottom. The barrier between you and other people, Pink Floyd's wall or whatever, there is a level where that just doesn't exist. And so that's where like empathy and like maybe even telepathy can take place, where there's just like in us, it's not really this distinct individual and that distinct individual, which ultimately aren't real to begin with. So all I can say for sure is that from the point of view of Orthodox Theravada Buddhism, there is no collective karma. Although there's, you could argue that the same kind of thing does happen anyway, for whatever reason or through whatever means. In that people with similar karma are just going to be reborn together, and so there's going to be that kind of agreement of karma, and you could call that a kind of group karma. At least there's like trends with regard to what kind of individual karma the inhabitants of the society have. So yeah, that's my best answer on that. With regard to whether there really is collective karma, I could be a heretic and accept the possibility that there is. And for all I know, there may be. It all depends on how you look at it. Next question from Chaplin. I'm really enjoying reading your first two books that you recently released on Amazon. Do you plan on publishing any of your translations or other works when this current series is complete? Um, yeah, I think so. that is the plan. It's going to depend on whether the this current series really is, I mean, if people appreciate it and buy it, and if it's turns out that writing a whole new book from scratch would be worthwhile. If I think people will actually read it, then yeah, I would be happy to do that, especially if I'm not too busy, um, like working a regular job to do it. With regard to my translations, most of my translations are in the first volume on Essays of Theravada Buddhism. There's the big Atthakavagga translation, which did get published very briefly for free distribution. And from the very beginning, I've always had the intention that this book, especially the Atthakavagga translation, should be for free distribution. It should be Dhamma Dana. I don't want to charge money for it. I did have the idea that if it did wind up in a larger anthology of something, I could somehow just have like an intro saying that please consider this part to be free. It's like the box of cereal, 20% free. It'd be like that. Although there is a very generous and devout fellow named Frank who has expressed a willingness to have this published at his own expense, or at least to make a large contribution to that. And I would feel happier with that, because it has always been my intention that the main, like possibly my main contribution to Western Buddhism would be my Atthakavagga translation. And so I really don't like the idea of charging money for it. But yeah, we'll just see how it goes. Let's see. Let's see. Publishing any of your translations or other works when this current series is complete. Yeah. I mean, like I said, if there's a positive response, positive enough response from my first books, that it makes it obvious that there is a demand or an appreciation, and people would be willing to buy more books if I were to just go through all the trouble, like writing my memoirs or something, then yeah, I'm going to continue with that, because I do write relatively well, and I don't always enjoy writing, but I enjoy finishing writing. It's like when you finish writing something, you can look at it as something that you have accomplished, and if it turned out well, then it feels good. So yeah, you're just gonna have to wait and see, and I'm gonna have to try to come up with good ways of advertising, because that is like my main issue at present, is how to make the books known, because if nobody knows about them, then nobody will buy them, other than just people who know me already. So we'll just see how that goes. And so the next question is from Dog Breath. Mr. Breath asks, this is kind of a long, complicated one. Biofeedback offers measurable data for meditators. Using this data, improvements can be made and deeper meditative relaxation states achieved. Autogenics, whatever that is, was also born out of the Western scientific mindset and also has many studies to show its efficacy. Have you ever considered using these methods? Would you consider utilizing these methods if you were to teach meditation? Do you see a time these methods may be used in mainstream Buddhism? Do you see anything wrong with using these methods in a Buddhist context? And I will consider all of that to be Mr. Brett's first question. And as it turns out, I've often thought about that. I remember biofeedback used to be, you get these electrodes attached to your head in various places, and then it would make little squiggly lines on the paper, sort of like a lie detector test or something. And I like that idea, because it's like if you can get into a good meditative state and then you see what the pattern is on the lines, then you can just kind of not necessarily lock into that, but what it is that's creating the best results. And then you can sort of use the squiggly lines or whatever it is as just something that you focus your attention on, and you can kind of control that by cultivating the mental state that causes the lines to be in the optimal, at least optimal for you configuration. So I actually went to the trouble of getting this little, I can't remember what it was called, but it was a biofeedback thing that It had made progress since the squiggly lines on the paper. It was a Bluetooth thing that you'd fit onto your head. It just had one electrode that stuck to, it pressed up against like your left frontal lobe. And I used it a little while. It was hard to get the Bluetooth to hook up. It was really kind of a chintzy thing, and it wasn't really accurate enough to be useful to me. And so, because of the complications of using it and the questionable results, I just stopped using it after a while. But they are getting better at it. In fact, the US government is doing a lot of experiments on um, like having electrodes, up against your head and using that as a way of like um, operating on like a fighter plane, or pretty soon you'll be able to play video games just by thinking your commands. To some degree, it's already happening. And so, yeah, I don't see any problem with that. I think that could be really useful technology for aiding people in meditation. And they do have better ones than the chintzy little one electrode one that I got. I think they've got one that has like a headband with several electrodes that may produce better, more reliable results. So yeah, if anybody wants to try that, get one of the good ones and tell me how it works, because I was really interested in that, and I do still think it's a good idea. Next question from Dog Breath. It is not possible to experience. Oh, this one's a Lulu also. It is not possible to experience something that is not known. If it were, it would instantly become the known. Meaning, any state of consciousness experienced must be knowable and therefore natural. And then he's got three questions following up from this. Does this mean enlightenment is a purely natural state and not something extraordinary, and that anyone can attain it? If so, why does it appear so few have attained it? Does this mean that meditation without supernatural concepts added to it is simply deep relaxation? And if the enlightened state is natural, why is it necessary to work or have to do something to attain it? Wouldn't it be instantly available or quickly attainable, by which I mean as easily attainable as relaxing? Okay, this one's got some unpacking to do. So, I mean, the first statement that he has, that's sort of like the springboard to these questions, is it is not possible to experience something that is not known. Meaning, any state of consciousness experienced must be knowable and therefore natural. Um, yes and no. I mean, you can experience something and really not know what it really is. You can perceive something, you don't know what it is. It's like, what the hell is that? But it's like you just experience as that whatever it is, and I'm not exactly sure what to label it any more specifically than just this thing that I'm unfamiliar with. So that's how perception works. You have to put some kind of a label onto it. It has to be something, but I mean, it can be something as vague as this, whatever it is, that I really can't define any more exactly than this, whatever it is. So it is possible to experience a mental state that you're unfamiliar with and just has you confused, and you don't really see all the way through to the bottom of it. But anything that you experience, um, yeah, it's natural and it's noble to the extent that you at least have perceived it as something. But it might not be, as I say, it might not be anything more specific than just this. What is this? But yeah, from the Buddhist point of view, anything that you experience is natural. There really is nothing supernatural in Buddhism, except maybe for enlightenment itself, because enlightenment simply is off the scale. It is not part of samsara. Nirvana or nibbana is not in samsara. It's not any of the 31 planes of existence. It's just totally off the scale. So, getting to his first question here, does this mean enlightenment is a purely natural state and not something extraordinary, and that anyone can attain it? If so, why does it appear so few have attained it? Enlightenment itself is a paradoxical state because, as I say, it's off the scale, and it's it's like it's not samsara, but it's simultaneous with samsara. It kind of overlaps with samsara. it gets into the extremes of like the Mahayana Buddhists saying that nirvana and samsara are the same. So it's a paradoxical state, enlightenment especially. I mean, meditative states are one thing, but they're not enlightenment. Meditative states are like entirely different kettle of wax from nirvana, because nirvana has no beginning and no end. It is not conditioned. It has no causes and no effects. It's just this formless, infinite absolute, which means that it just transcends existence and non-existence. We're getting all the way back to Hegel again. And so Buddhism just doesn't even bother to try to reify it mostly. See, does this mean that enlightenment is a purely natural state? That's questionable. Not something extraordinary. Well, it is extraordinary, assuming that you can even say that it exists within the context of samsara, which is what we're stuck in right now, and that anyone can attain it. Whether anyone can attain, I mean, that would be purely potential. I think realistically, most people can't because they're just not ready for it. They're not ripe for it, even though they're just swimming in it all the time, because any kind of formless, unconditioned absolute isn't going to have boundaries. So if it's in the mind of an arahant, it's also in the mind of a chicken and like a serial killer. It's just that we don't notice it. So if so, why does it appear so few have attained it? Is because they're so locked into their perceptual system of dualities and is and isn't and this and that, natural and unnatural, all the words, all the concepts. It just makes so much noise that they just don't see through it to the absolute foundation of it all, so to speak. Next question the next question in this list of questions from Dog Breath. Does this mean that meditation without supernatural concepts added to it is simply deep relaxation? In a way, you could say that it's simply deep relaxation. It's like deep relaxation of your mind. It's like ultimately, from the dharmic point of view, you're meditating to make your mind as clear and as awake and as peaceful and uncluttered as possible, so that you can ultimately see through all of the phenomena that your mind is conjuring up to the reality that is underlies that and ultimately pervades it. So yeah, I mean, meditation without supernatural concepts added to it really is it's like techniques for pacifying and clarifying, simplifying your mind, making it as awake and alert and clear and empty and uncluttered as possible, so that you can see through the veil, see through just the phenomena, the multiplistic phenomena of samsara to the reality which lies underneath it, because we are in the matrix right now. We are in Plato's cave. So the last question here from Dog Breath on this list of questions: if the enlightened state is natural, why is it necessary to work or to have to do something to attain it? Wouldn't it be instantly available or quickly attainable, by which I mean as easily attainable as relaxing? Well, I mean, relaxing is one thing, and becoming enlightened is something else, because just relaxing is not going to get you enlightened. Like Krishnamurti said, you can open the window, but you can't make the breeze blow in. The best you can do is just make yourself as available for enlightenment as possible by simplifying and clarifying your mind as possible. So, I mean, it kind of is instantly available because we're already soaking in it. You know, our mind is already just pervaded by enlightenment. It's just that we don't care or we don't notice. But just because, just for the sake of argument, if something were natural, let's say if the enlightened state is natural, why is it necessary to work for it or have to do something to attain it? I mean, being at the top of Mount Everest is natural. You know, I mean, it's not by supernatural means that a person climbs to the top of Mount Everest. It's not by supernatural means that somebody wins an Olympic gold medal. It's purely natural means that you win the Olympic gold medal, but still you got to work your ass off. And even most people who are working their ass off to win an Olympic gold medal still don't win it. So just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's just going to plop right into your lap. But again, I mean, becoming fully enlightened, if there's anything at all that's supernatural in Buddhism, it would be um, nirvana and the attainment of nirvana, because nirvana cannot be caused; it has to be effortless, and you cannot force nirvana. You cannot make it happen. You cannot make yourself be enlightened. All you can do is be as available to it as possible, and it's we're almost getting into the realm of like divine grace, where it's just whether it happens or not is not entirely under your control. So I hope I'm not like totally confounding everybody with these answers, but some of these questions are just, they're just going right off the rails into paradox and things that you really can't put into words. The whole middle path is just a mind bender. Middle path is not only between self torture and self indulgence. It's in between yes and no. It's in between is and isn't, between existence and non existence. Okay, next question from Potila. Some traditions, like contemplative Christianity and bhakti yoga, talk about being infused with divine light or divine love as one of or the highest states attainable by humans. They hold that this is God bringing the experience to them by way of blessings or grace. What would the equivalent Buddhist state of meditation be to these experiences of intense love or light? It seems that it is a lower state than described in the suttas for causing awakening, because it appears to be a highly emotional rapture-like trance, but also a collapse of the self, quote unquote, and generates intense sympathy and peace. You have spoken a few times about a type of perennial view of paths, but it seems that some have experiences that have no correlation between traditions. Okay, so I'm understanding this question to mean something like in Christianity, at least among some Christian mystics or saints, they are saying that the soul of the like the highly advanced Christian, you just be full of light and love for the whole universe, because God is love, and you become God through participation or some such. And yeah, I think one thing to bear in mind that may be significant here is that Christianity has always been more heart oriented and or feelings oriented, faith oriented, whereas Buddhism has been more head oriented, more philosophical and scientific. And so, um, there are various mental states that you can experience um, in it while being enlightened, presumably. There's like an enlightened being can still have all kinds of, pretty much still the same spectrum of thoughts and feelings, other than maybe some really unskillful negative ones. Um, so it could be that just the more heart oriented path is taking you in a slightly different direction on your way to enlightenment than the more sterile, um, just sort of analytical, or not. No, I shouldn't even say analytical. Just more of a head oriented, more of a like a jnana yoga kind of approach. It's not bhakti yoga. It's more just the yoga of knowledge, or the yoga, or raja yoga, the yoga of like meditative contemplation. Um, so I mean, it could be that it's just that Christianity is going by a slightly different route to the top of the mountain than Buddhism is. Or it could also be that like a fully enlightened being could be experiencing this light and love, although it's not so much um, emphasized in the texts. And I mean, it's not so much emphasized even in their own life, because they just kind of see it from a more head oriented point of view. So yeah, I mean, you can meditate on metta. I think metta meditation gets you up to, what is it, second or third jhana supposedly, um, but that would not be enlightenment. It would not be the same as enlightenment. In fact, no mental state is the same as enlightenment, because enlightenment really is not this or that mental state. So yeah, that's another kind of a subtle one. But yeah, my best guess is that the more heart-oriented, more feelings and faith-oriented systems are going to have more of that kind of fireworks and special effects going on your way there. But it's not the same as enlightenment. Or if it is the same as enlightenment, then even a fully enlightened Theravada Buddhist monk would be experiencing that sort of thing, but it wouldn't be seen as important or as worthy of mention or some such. That's my best answer to that. So I'm going to move on to Potila's next question. Though Orthodox Theravada does not teach an origin for existence, I must. So why is there something instead of nothing? I can't be an atheist because this world is just so odd outside of Theravada teachings. What is your thoughts on the origin or reason for all things? Okay, well, I've already kind of touched on this before. And, it's like going back to Hegel, absolute being and absolute non-being are indistinguishable. And so this whole, the 10,000 things mentioned in the Tao Te Ching come from like this self-referential consciousness which arises because it can out of the infinite everything nothing. There's anything that possibly can exist, can or anything that possibly can exist does exist in this virtual potential form, and then this virtual potential consciousness becomes self-referential and starts perceiving itself and thinking that what it is perceiving is really what it is, and it's just like the virtual statue um, that you say that it potentially or virtually does exist. But again, from the Buddhist point of view, this entire universe arises through ignorance. Or, I mean, some old versions of dependent co-arising say that it arises from perception, or papancha sankha, which is like differentiating designation, which is what I consider to be essentially a synonym for perception. So somehow you've got the potential. You can say that there's this infinite consciousness, which because it's infinite and formless, can't really be said to exist. It just transcends any kind of no label will really stick to it. And then in this infinite consciousness, you have little virtual parts of it that become aware of themselves and then become unenlightened because they think that what they are perceiving is the reality, and they falsely differentiate themselves from everything else, and then they're generating all these dreams, which is our karmic samsaric existence. But to say that there is something out of nothing or something instead of nothing, again, those are the two extremes. It's like something is one extreme, nothing is the other extreme, and Buddhism follows the path by the middle. But dependent co-arising just cuts right through it. It's not something, it's not nothing. And it, again, I mean, this is sort of the theme of this Q&A, and I hope I'm not just blackpilling everybody on these Q&As, because yeah, people keep asking these questions of, is it yes or is it no, or does it exist or does it not exist? And ultimately, from the point of ultimate truth, it's you can't say it's one or the other, you can't say it's both, and you can't say it's neither. It's just reality cannot be put into words. Reality is an unthinkable void um, until you experience it, and then it's like infinity. It's God. It's Tao, Brahman, whatever, Nirvana. So yeah, if you think that the universe exists, that's one extreme, and if you think the universe doesn't exist, that's the other extreme. And Buddhism teaches the way by the middle. There's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya, which in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation is called the Cosmologist, which deals with this. Like this cosmologist asks the Buddha, does the world exist? And the Buddha says, that's the oldest philosophy of the world. So then he says, well then, Mr. Gautama, does it not exist? And the Buddha just says, that's the second philosophy of the world. And then he says that Buddhism teaches, the middle way between these extremes of is and isn't, and that's the middle path of dependent co-arising. And if you really want to understand dependent co-arising, I suggest you study Nagarjuna, because I really don't think the stock 12 Nidana formula is really all that explanatory. So I'll just move on to the next question after I've once again denied yes and no. Where in Buddhist cosmology would the Semitic gods like Yahweh and Allah fit in? Are they local devas who gain power the more worshippers they have? That's an interesting idea. Perhaps more like Rakshas or Asuras, given their desire for power, praise, and adoration. There is a portion in the Digha Nikaya where Brahma is, there's a portion in the Digha Nikaya where the Brahma is reborn alone and mistakenly believes he creates the universe, but it is actually Kama coming into being. The satire recalls the Semitic gods' behavior and view of themselves. The desert gods seem to be opposed to Dhamma. Are there gods in the suttas who work against the Buddha, Mara excluded because that's his job? Um, well, let's just assume for the sake of argument that Yahweh and Allah really are deities, and that they aren't just like kind of a crude and deluded attempt at describing ultimate reality, or what the Hindus or the Vedantists call Brahman. So yeah, you'd have to say that there are some kind of devas. I mean, they wouldn't necessarily even be as high as Brahmas. Um, but I mean, if you read the text, especially in the Old Testament, you can see that Yahweh Himself evolved. It's um, in some respects, He's just a sociological phenomenon, because originally He was equated with the god El, who was like the Canaanite god who had a consort, and he was just one of many gods and just sort of the god responsible for this and that. And then Moses came along and conflated El with Yahweh, who was some sort of Midianite or Edomite god, and he became more and more powerful until by the Babylonian captivity, not much earlier than then, maybe not earlier than then, he was the only god. And Allah kind of was very much influenced by the Old Testament Yahweh. To some degree, they overlap. So, I mean, what Semitic, what they are like, I mean, it's hard to say, because it's like, you know, 3,000 years ago, Yahweh was very different than he is now. Yeah, so he has evolved. But let's just assume, for the sake of existence, you've got some kind of powerful God resembling the Old Testament Yahweh. Um, yeah, they'd be devas, and obviously not all devas are dharmic. Most of the devas, if you can trust like what the Buddhist texts say, they're all just having their fun up in some heaven realm, just enjoying the sensual pleasures, enjoying their gold and jewel encrusted palaces full of celestial nymphs, and they've got like the heavenly gardens and the fountains and all that kind of a stuff. So they don't really care one way or the other about the Buddha or about Dharma. They're just uh, they're just living their own hedonistic existence, pretty much the way a lot of humans are living their hedonistic existence here. And for that matter, a lot of like spoiled and pampered pets are just living their hedonistic existence, even though they're in the animal realm. So I would assume that most gods and are just not really concerned with the highest Dhamma. And with regard to this question here at the end, are there gods in the suttas who work against the Buddha? Um, well, I mean, in addition to Mara, you've got Mara's daughters, who are kind of his assistants, and there's a lot of mention of Maras in the plural, and that's not necessarily just a sequence, like a temporal sequence of this god has the role of Mara until his karma is exhausted, and then he's replaced by a different being who plays the role of Mara until his karma is exhausted. I mean, there is that too, but I think there are probably a lot of wrathful deities, as the Tibetans describe them. And there's one weird sutta, the Mara Tajaniya Sutta, where it's talking about Kali, even how Kali is like an aunt of Mara. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's probably like more or less malevolent devas. I mean, even like the, what do you call them? In Burmese, they're called balu, the yaka. They've become like man-eating ogres, but technically speaking, they would be low-level devas also. So yeah, there's a lot of devas. I don't know how well Yahweh and Allah would fit in because, as I say, Yahweh especially um, evolved radically from just a kind of tribal Canaanite god up to just essentially the only true God. But yeah, I would guess that most devas are just sort of like sort of upgraded versions of us. They're living in a better world. They live longer. They don't get sick, and they whenever they're hungry, they just think, and the food's already in their mouth or whatever. That kind of stuff. They don't have to go potty. So they would be just sort of adharmic just because they don't really give a damn. That's one reason why they say that being born as a human is the best possible way to be born because the beings in the lower realms they're too ignorant and too afflicted really to practice Dhamma or to understand it. And the devas have it so nice that they just are not inspired to try to improve their situation. So yeah, I mean there have been devas in the texts, like in the Samyutta Nikaya, coming to monks and kind of telling them, why don't you just, I mean, you're still young, why not just drop out and enjoy pleasures of the senses until you're old and then you can ordain if you want to. So yeah, lots of devas just do not get it or do not appreciate Dhamma. And I assume some of them are even opposed to it, um, including Mara and his daughters and possibly his kinfolk, the other Maras, and some Kalis too, maybe. So yeah, I think I answered that one sufficiently, I hope. Next question is from Frank. I'd like you to explain the Rains Retreat from the perspective of a monk. Okay. The Rains Retreat in Theravada Buddhism is kind of analogous to Lent in Roman Catholicism. And in the Buddhist time, it was usually the first 3 months of the monsoon season, of the official monsoon season, although a monk is allowed to postpone his rains retreat by 1 month, so it would be the second, third, and fourth months of the monsoon season. And in ancient India, it was just traditional that monks would stay in one place because it's raining all the time, and living under trees is not really good. I've tried that before. I found from my own experience that a tree does not make a good umbrella, or at least the tree I was staying under did not make a good umbrella. It just, the leaves kind of channel the raindrops together into bigger drips that get you just as wet. Maybe, I mean, some trees I assume they shed rain, but it would seem like it would not be beneficial to the tree to deflect all the water away from the roots. So yeah, that plus monks wandering around during the planting season, they might be trampling farmers' crops and that sort of thing. And so it just became a tradition early on, probably among all of the samana or ascetic schools in India, that during the heaviest time of rainfall of the year, monks would just stay in one place. And then it became traditional that was a time of more intensive meditation. And yeah, even in like Burma, during the 3 months of the rains retreat, that is considered to be a time of more intensive practice, and people generally don't get married at that time. So right at the end of the rains retreat, there's all kinds of weddings in Burma because the people have been waiting for the rains retreat to end. But Frank here is asking for the rains retreat from the perspective of a monk. So yeah, that's essentially what it is. I mean, originally when monks were homeless wanderers, it was just a time when it was heavy rain where they would just stay together in one place, and it's against the rules for a monk to live in the open or under a tree during the rains retreat. He has to actually go under a roof or into a cave or something. And yeah, so that's about it. I mean, it's the years are counted in rains. The word for year in Pali is wasa, which also just means rain. It's like, like the Indians in the old cowboy movies talking about many moons. Even the word month has the same etymology as the word moon. So in ancient India, the word for year just kind of followed the same thing. It was like one monsoon season was like the kind of how you count not only years in general, but amongst seniority is counted in wasa, how many rains retreats you have been ordained. So my seniority was 30 rains before I started wearing this nice shirt. Okay, so next question is from JML. Is there any chance doing mushrooms a few times just for curiosity's sake would not be a precept violation? Okay, that's kind of an interesting question. The fifth precept is I undertake the precept to refrain from ale, wine, and intoxicants which cause heedlessness or cloudedness of mind. So I think the key term there is the heedlessness. It's a cause for carelessness. Like if you're drunk, you just don't give a shit. It just kind of makes you stupid sometimes and makes you less conscientious. It makes you less aware of Dharma. So, with regard to mushrooms, it would depend on why you take it and its effect on you. Like, as a monk, I took mushrooms at least twice that I can remember. And for me, taking psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD almost always result in like mystical states and religious experiences. So, if you're taking it for spiritual reasons, like as an entheogen, so to speak, like doing like an ayahuasca ceremony, something like that, then I think it could be justifiable, because sometimes taking a chemical that will just slam you out of a rut is exactly what you need, or at least it can be very beneficial. So yeah, I mean, there's a good chance I wouldn't have even become a monk if I hadn't taken um, psychedelic drugs as a layperson, because one of the main effects that it has is it just shows you that there are alternative ways of viewing reality that in their own way are just as valid as just being a straight normie. So yeah, I wouldn't say that doing mushrooms is necessarily in violation of the fifth precept unless you're doing it just recreationally to party. Um, you say here just for curiosity's sake. I mean, just for curiosity's sake, I don't know if that would be a good enough reason. But if you're doing it for spiritual purposes, like to bring up stuff that's deep down, to knock you out of ruts that maybe you're stuck in, to give you like a different perspective on reality, to expand your consciousness, something like that, I think it could be justifiable. So finally, the last question, the very last one, and we've already gone more than 2 hours, is from Shawarma Dharma. When thinking about serious practitioners, forest monks, etc., what are the salient differences between the Thai, Burmese, and Sri Lankan approaches? That's kind of an interesting question. And I mean, I would have to rely on like real, oversimplifications and generalizations, because the Thais and the Burmese and the Sri Lankans, they all belong to the same religion, quote unquote, Theravada Buddhism, although there are cultural differences. And so, one gross oversimplification is that of the three pitakas, the three baskets of the Pali Tipitaka, um, the Sri Lankans have a reputation for emphasizing the suttas. The Thais have a reputation for emphasizing Vinaya or monastic discipline, and the Burmese have a reputation for emphasizing Abhidhamma, or like the abstract technical philosophy stuff. But with regard to the serious practitioners, um, it's my understanding that the Burmese tend more towards mindfulness meditation, like Mahasi has been probably the most influential tradition of the 20th century, like of the past 100 years in Burma. Sri Lanka, it's my understanding you're more likely to do samatha meditation, more emphasis on jhana. Um, and with regard to the Thais, I'm not exactly sure what the Thai practices are because the Thais kind of have a reputation for just following the rules and not meditating very much. But this is an oversimplification again. It's just a gross generalization. But the Thais are really into following the rules and living the lifestyle. And they also do more dhutanga, so they're more likely to just be wandering around homeless and sleeping in cemeteries and that kind of a thing. But they do have a reputation for not meditating nearly as much as the Burmese. So I'm just comparing Thai Theravada with Burmese Theravada. Just again, going with the gross oversimplification and the generalization, the Burmese are more interested in meditation and scholarship, and the Thais are more interested in following the monastic discipline and practicing outward austerities. And with regard to Sri Lanka, it was very corrupt, very degenerate for hundreds of years. Although in the 20th century, I think, maybe even the very late 19th century, they started having reform movements that were very serious forest traditions. And I don't have a lot of experience with them. I've got no personal experience. I've met a few monks, Western monks, who lived in Sri Lanka in these traditions. And it seems to be very much based on the suttas and very, very sincere. Although most Sri Lankan Buddhism, and for that matter, most Burmese and Thai Buddhism, is relatively corrupt. Um, so the salient differences between the Thai, Burmese, and Sri Lankan approaches, uh, yeah, I mean, it's you're going to find the full spectrum pretty much everywhere. I would think there's not a whole lot of forest Burmese Buddhism. Like I was ordained in the Tongpulu tradition, which is one of the few Burmese forest traditions. So the Burmese traditions are mostly, for serious practitioners especially, they tend to be centered in like meditation centers, like Mahasi and Pa'auk now, and there are a bunch of other ones, Sun Lun and Mogok, and you have the Goenka method, which arose in Burma also. But they tend not to be based on forest practice. And Thais, there's more emphasis. There are more forest traditions in Thailand and probably now in Sri Lanka also. But I'm really most of my experiences with Burmese Theravada, so I can't really speak with a lot of authority on Thai and Sri Lankan Buddhism. Although with regard to the Thais, a few hundred years ago, the Burmese made an unprovoked invasion of Thailand and sacked their capital, Ayutthaya, and it caused their like ecclesiastical hierarchy and their Buddhist, like the university system, to collapse, which they never fully recovered from that. And so the Thais, even some of the meditation masters are really bad scholars. They don't know the Pali correctly. They use the terms incorrectly. But partly because of that, they also teach from their own personal experience, which is good. And so you have some real meditation masters in Thailand, even though they might not be familiar with the correct Pali terminology and so forth. But I assume that is at least as good, probably better in many cases than the Burmese idea of just dogmatism and you just teach exactly what is in the books, even though you may not have any personal experience with it. And again, with regard to the Sri Lankans, I really can't say that. I can't say that much about them because I've got very little experience with them. So yeah, I guess that's the last question, and we're already well over 2 hours. I tried to warn you. I hope you went pee before you started watching this. And if you have more questions, I mean, it's people are just keep coming up with more and more questions, which is good. So if you have more questions, just leave them in the comments below, or if you're on the Subscribe Star channel, which the link is below, um, I do make an announcement a few days before I do the next one. Or if you're on the Discord server, which now is by invite only because I think we were getting infiltrated by trolls. You can request um, an invite to the Discord server, and then there's like a Q&A room there where you can ask questions there too. But if you're just new to all of this, then yeah, just it's good enough to leave your questions in the comments below. And if it's on YouTube, then I'll get like an email. BitChute is a little trickier. I don't get notifications so much. I have to go search for those. But yeah, you're welcome to ask questions. And like some of these people that have asked them today, you can hit me with your best shot. Some of these were like, you just have to wander into the realm of formless void and incomprehensibility trying to answer these things. But I guess the main theme of the questions today was the middle path is not just the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture. It's the middle path between yes and no, between is and isn't, between existence and non-existence. And if you don't understand that, then that's completely normal, because nobody can really understand it intellectually. If you think you've understood it intellectually, you've gone off the tracks. You're in a rut. So yeah, that's it. And yeah, like I say, you're welcome to ask again, and be happy.